Okay, this unit is going to cover the second part of what's called the infectious diseases. This is going to be over the respiratory and digestive system. That almost covers it. Of course, you can do all body system, central nervous system. We're kind of run out of time, so we're going to do these two body systems in same format as before. You have to know the causative agent, know some of the symptoms, know how you get this. Real quick anatomy of the respiratory system. So here are sinuses that are hollowed out portions of bone. They actually have a mucous membrane layer, and they are all there are channels that all drain or come down and connect to the nasal cavity, which is why if a person has a cold, they can get a headache sometimes because it gets up in the sinuses. Nasal cavity, this is called the pharynx back here, or pharynx. Uvula is the back part of the throat. Larynx, voice box, and the back here would be the esophagus, so that's a different body system. But this is called the trachea. These are the bronchi that go down into the lungs and they get super small. It goes the primary bronchi, then secondary bronchi, then what are called the tertiary bronchi, then a respiratory bronchiole, then an alveolar duct, and so they get really small once they get down to the lungs. So this is the lower respiratory system. Up here is a nice summary of the upper respiratory system. And sometimes, it depends on what book we're using, sometimes they'll throw the larynx in with the upper, but that's okay. The epiglottis is a piece of cartilage that covers the glottis, which is the opening to the trachea, and that's where the vocal cords are. That's how a person can produce sound. So that's a real quick tour of the entire respiratory system. So our first candidate, pretty common, strep throat. And these are bacterial, like it says here. Strep pharyngitis, so you're talking about inflammation of the back of the throat. Streptococcus pyogenes. Now there are other organisms that can cause this. This is the majority one. Now this one's a bad one if it were to progress to other parts of the body. So respiratory aerosols, contaminated food. I had a student once that got a strep infection, ended up in their kidneys, and they lost their kidneys as a result. I mean, had to have kidney transplant. So, it can be a bad thing. Characterized by local inflammation and fever, tonsillitis occurs. Local inflammation of basically the pharynx, which is the throat, back of the throat. And can cause lymph nodes to become tender. And basically, most people know this strep test can take the swab of the back of the throat and go do what's called an indirect agglutination test, get clumping, positive for strep. Otitis media. Now, and just like all the other sections, there is a PowerPoint that goes along with this. So here is ouch. So there's strep throat. It says pockets of pus in the tonsils. Believe it or not, if you look down into the ear and up here, this is kind of a side view. So the ear canal is called the external acoustic meatus, the little passageway that goes, the outside of the ear is called the auricle, but the actual tunnel, the passageway into the ear where sound goes, that's called the external acoustic meatus. And what you have in there is a tympanic cavity, which is also where you have the tympanic membrane, which is what that is. And that's an extremely swollen eardrum. This is the tympanic membrane. So otitis media is an ear infection. So Haemophilus influenza, once again, strep can cause it. There's a part, and you can't see it here, and I don't have the picture, but there's a thing called the eustachian tube or auditory tube that actually connects the ear cavity down to the throat. So a person that has strep throat, that can actually go back up into the ears. And a lot of reasons a person can get get an ear infection. It says infected nasal throat mucosa, talked about that, through the eustachian tube. Water, enlarged adenoids, which are tonsils in the back of the throat. So something like that can spread to the ears. So that's what otitis media is. It's an ear infection. Diphtheria, which is part of the DTaP vaccine. Diphtheria, tetanus, pertussis, causes a membrane to form in the back of the throat. This is a pseudomembrane. Diphtheria is bad stuff. Cornybacterium diphtheriae respiratory aerosols and fomites, sore throat, fever, followed by general malaise. Malaise is a weakened feeling, person that feels sick, swelling in the neck. Characteristic of this is a tough grayish membrane that forms in the throat in response to the infection. So fibrin is actually what is found in blood clots, so it's tough stuff. And sometimes that can come loose, like it says there, it can block. All right, these are viral infections. Coryza, cold. These are rhinoviruses. I always think that sounds funny. Aerosols, fomites, hands, basically being in the room somewhere that's cold, you get exposed to it. Sneezing, inflammation of the mucous membranes of the nose, sore throat. Malaise, like I said, that's a general weak feeling. So up in this area here. Okay, lower respiratory tract. Now we did this. I'm sorry to bounce back and forth. So you're talking about below, including the larynx, this whole area in the bottom. Well, same there, but anyway, let me go back down. Yeah, colds, that's our upper respiratory. Whooping cough, pertussis. And what it does, it makes a cytotoxin. This is the Bordetella pertussis, is actually what causes it. Anyway, it paralyzes the cilia in the bronchioles, the pseudostratified ciliated columnar. So a tracheal cytotoxin. The cilia, little hairs don't move back and forth. Mucus accumulates. What's being inhaled is accumulating, and it causes major coughing fits that can last, forever. People torn their diaphragm coughing so much. Bubonic plague, that's a bad one. It's spread by squirrels of all things, little rodents. There's the cilia in the bronchioles. Bubonic plague causes these things called buboes. Swollen lymph nodes, and then get a ring around them, like a dark ring. Yersinia pestis, that's a bacteria. Yes, it was called the Black Death, and I believe there is actually a viral form of this too. This is the bad, highly contagious version. It's spread by infected fleas from rats, ground squirrels, prairie dogs, animal skins. Basically, this bacteria, Yersinia pestis, infects the fleas, little bitty insects, and it blocks the flea's digestive tract. And so the fleas start starving, so they start biting things, and that's how it's spread. So fleas on rats, ground squirrels. Dark blue areas of skin from hemorrhages, not destroyed by phagocytic cells. Lymph nodes become enlarged. They're called buboes. Fever develops. Bad stuff. Can be fatal fairly quickly. Mortality rate 50 to 75% untreated. Death usually less than a week after the symptoms appear. So bad. That's the end of it. Bad things. The nursery rhyme, Ring Around the Rosie, is talking about these. These are the rosies. The pocket full of posy was a flower that was carried because people had plague didn't smell good. And the whole ashes, they all burned down. Back in the day, bubonic plague wiped out half of Europe at one point, and the bodies were burned in the streets, and so there was black clouds everywhere. Anyway, that's where that nursery rhyme came from. So anyway, that's some just real common diseases of the respiratory system.